Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacy and Phil Thompson.
It's another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast.
Hi, my name is Steve Lacy.
And I'm Phil Thompson. That's your cue. When I stop talking, that means you can talk.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you were like, the levels weren't right, or because you kind of just stopped like, oh, I messed up, or...
Well, I do mess up.
And you reached for the soundboard controls. So.
Well, yeah, because I realized that I probably should be watching the monitor levels here. This isn't as easy as it looks.
Yeah, you got to record it and be the sound engineer at the same time.
I do, yeah.
Where's our sound engineer?
I don't know. We laid him off or something. All right, so we come to you every week with this podcast. Of course, I'm Phil Thompson. He's Steve Lacy, and we're a tech company. We do streaming video. We do mobile apps. We do church management and website stuff. But we're not going to do any of those things today.
No, what are we doing today?
We are talking about a subject, and we do this from time to time. We talk about other subjects besides tech. We're going to talk about spiritual abuse.
All right.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and tell you, at least from my perspective, that spiritual abuse is very, very common in religious circles, has been so for many, many years, and I thought it would be good to at least talk about a few of these things. In fact, we did a podcast like this similar several years ago, and we actually got some feedback, more feedback than we usually do. And so I think it is pretty common, and I'm not saying every church has it, but I'm saying that it's pretty common out there, and I would be curious to see what kind of feedback we get on this.
All right. So let's jump into it.
We'll just jump right into it.
These signs of spiritual abuse.
And I have been in these environments before.
Yeah,
so
primarily leadership to the congregation. Spiritual abuse from leadership, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's just jump into it.
So, number one is the standards of honor, respect, and authority are distorted.
So one of the biggest factor when it comes to spiritual abuse is instead of having creating a culture in your church of honor, respect, both to the leadership and to people that maybe not in leadership, there's this deal that leaders sometimes lose their ability to be approachable, and this can cause a misuse of authority. And have you heard that scripture? Touch not God's anointed. You ever hear that verse? It's in there. It's in the Bible. Yeah. A lot of people will use that, leaders, pastors, will use that to manipulate people. And so if there's something going on and if there's disagreement, or if there's just maybe even questions about something involved in leadership, many times you will see those who are involved in spiritual abuse from a leadership perspective, instead of working things out and talking with people and being approachable, they will kind of put up this wall that says, hey, I'm in charge here, you're just a follower.
All right, so they become more there's some authoritarianism that's going on.
It is, and so what happens is people hopefully will leave when that goes on, but there are some people that will just sit silently and do silent submission. Well, if we get to it, we'll talk a little bit about the shepherding movement. But there'll people just kind of sit there. They won't really engage, and they just kind of go because, well, that's the thing to do. We need to go. We need to submit and all that stuff. But so it's a distorted level here of shepherding. It's a distorted spiritual fathering, which everybody I think needs. This has become very distorted, and so leadership is driven to use what I would call intimidation, manipulation, force to try to make things happen. And there's a group of people that will go along with that, and they'll just sit quietly and do whatever somebody says. But it is a sign of spiritual abuse if this is going on.
All right. So that's number one, huh?
That is number one.
Number two.
Unsafe environments when it comes to dealing with problems. So this is kind of related the idea here is that, your church should be a safe place where you help people with their problems, walk with people in love and grace and truth, and all that comes into play. But in a spiritually abusive environment, people are many times just put down, demonized, embarrassed. The relationships there are not protected. There's betrayal among people.
I would assume that it would not allow people to become their authentic selves.
Absolutely. And
admit to any sin in their lives or anything like that.
Yeah. There's this idea that, don't say anything negative and that kind of a thing. And so people don't really learn how to go through pain in an effective way. They don't know how to work things out because they're put down. And I have found that when a church does nothing about a problem that people are having or someone's having, that there's this passivity that takes place, and it just damages the whole culture. So it's an unsafe environment. It's just they don't deal with real problems.
Okay. And moving on, number 3 on our list, heavy religious performance-driven culture.
So again, a sign of spiritual abuse. Many times you'll see this in a lot of groups that may not necessarily be walking in an abusive manner, but there's this thing in Christianity, and not only Christianity but other religions, that hey, you got to perform, you got to live up to these standards that we have, and if you don't live up to these standards, then you're out the window. You're not doing what you should be doing. There's something wrong with you. You're in sin. And then many times people are treated.
So these standards are what? Based on, so those are a life free from sin, or
yeah. I mean, if you look, if your kids have problems, you're raising your kids, and your kids have issues. Well, you must be doing something wrong, because as a parent, you need to live up to these standards, and your family needs to live up. So if your wife has a problem, you have a problem, or your kids have a problem, this whole perfectionism
Don't
idea.
show up at church and blemish our reputation, huh?
Well, yeah, and again, it's this kind of this judgmental thing that you've got to live up to this, and if you're not living up to these standards of, it's just, to me, it's ridiculous. I mean, everybody has issues, everybody has problems, some more than others. Some families are great, other families have struggles, And so there's this shame that you run into, which we'll kind of get into here in a little bit, but it's really based on perfectionism. That if you're really living, and you see some of this stuff happens. You see these guys on TV and all these things that are living well. They have lots of money, and you don't. So therefore, something must be wrong with you.
Okay. So as we go through these, these are signs of spiritual abuse.
Yeah. I mean,
I assume the action that we would encourage our listeners to take would be leave, right?
Yeah,
or
probably.
You probably don't want to go and butt heads and try to confront the leader, or maybe you do. I don't know.
Well, you could. So I have a friend up in the Washington State area. Actually, Washington State area, and there was a large church up there. I don't know if I should mention the name, but she was part of this church. Her husband was part of this church, and there was spiritual abuse going on. And it was a mega church. Yeah. I mean, it was a mega church. This guy was books, people, they know who he was on the internet. And by the way, he's still going today. He was forced to resign because my friend and some other people got together and literally just kind of exposed some of the crazy stuff that was going on. But there was this culture that got built within the church where they protected this guy. Many of the leaders protected him, and eventually it was exposed, and eventually it fell apart. The church is no longer.
It was exposed to the remainder of the church.
It was to the remainder of the church, and other people, other Christians from different parts of the country began to learn about this stuff, and there's still some investigations going on. But this guy left Washington, left the Washington area, Washington State area. Guess where he's at now? Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh.
He's starting his own church again.
Oh, near us. Huh?
Hopefully he learned from some of the mistakes. But what I'm getting at here is they confronted him, and eventually it did topple.
Okay.
So I won't mention who it was.
So those are your only two options, really. Either just leave and let the thing die with everybody leaving.
That's the easy way out.
And the ministry just dies, or you confront.
Yeah. And enough people finally left, and the ministry died. But there was confrontation, and the confrontation brought to light the spiritual abuse that was going on.
Okay.
So I think if you're able to, effectively confront and do it in a biblical way, a right way to do it, then I think that would be the thing to do. But it happens in all shapes and sizes. It happens in black churches, it happens in white churches, it happens in denominations, non-denominations as well.
Is there a common I would assume that one of the common denominators would be ego of the leadership.
Yep, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I
don't know if that's on our list or not, but got a leader with a big ego, then
it's part
beware,
part of what we talked about, number one, where the standards of honor and respect and authority are extremely distorted.
Right. Okay.
That was part of that. Yeah.
All right. So we have number 4. Fear and shame drive people into submission.
So again, you're using, if you're a leader and you're using fear to motivate people, if you're shaming people, many times I've seen this myself.
And this would
be
the people within within the congregation.
Your congregation, and you're trying to get people to do things using that. It crushes them. And again, there are people, and I know it seems unusual to you because you might think, well, if that's going on, I'm just going to leave. And that's what probably a normal person would do. But you have to understand there are people that maybe they've been raised in a church culture, or perhaps they've gotten to know the leadership, or in a particular case, one man or one woman who's leading the thing. And keep in mind, some of the spiritual abuse stuff, a person who starts a church doesn't necessarily start off abusive, but over a period of time, they begin to take on some of these traits we're talking about, or some of these signs. And so there's people that may have known them for years.
So, and I would think success in the ministry would fuel that,
can
right?
Very well be that. It's usually a part of that, but it's kind of like the old analogy, the frog. What is the old story of the frog in the boiling water? The frog's in the pot, and then you start to turn up the heat, and the frog doesn't jump out until it's too late, and it can't jump out. And a lot of people they're used to somebody, they like the person, but then things slowly change, and the next thing you know, you're in this weird deal, and you're not sure what to do.
All right.
Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm warming up to this topic a little more.
Well, good. I'm glad you are, because I'm telling you, it's very common. Not in every church, obviously, but in many, in overall, you see a lot of these things happen. All right, let's move on.
So number 5, emphasis on charismatic leader becomes the ultimate spokesperson on all spiritual issues.
So again, a lot of this stuff starts with one guy or one gal, and they might bring some people into their fold, and it multiplies. I'm talking about the signs of spiritual abuse here. But I have seen this over and over again, and that is that you have somebody that's a really charismatic leader, really does well, speaks well, great speaking in front of people, and then the next thing you know, when there are questions about things, instead of looking at the scriptures as your authority, or having important discussions with leadership or people, you just end up quoting the guy. Well, Apostle so-and-so says this,
right.
So therefore it must be true.
But not one of the original apostles.
Not one of the originals, but somebody that maybe goes by the title prophet or apostle or pastor,
right.
And I'm not saying people that go by those titles are wrong or practicing spiritual abuse. What I'm saying is that person gets quoted all the time.
Right.
Well, are they right?
Yeah.
Just because they say something doesn't mean they're right. Especially when you're looking at these signs of spiritual abuse. And so people, people don't necessarily, they don't think things out or study things out or research things out, and they just go along for the ride. Mm-hmm. And then before you know it, there's bad things happening.
Right. So they're getting away from the biblical authority and okay. I got you. So that's number 5.
Yeah.
So that's where the leader becomes the ultimate spokesperson on all spiritual issues.
Yep.
All right. So number 6. The leader's sins and weaknesses are minimized while the people's sins and weaknesses are maximized.
I've seen this many times, and that is just simply this. The leader can do no wrong, and if there's issues in his or her life, it's downplayed. And again, just as we said here in the point here, your issues, if you're not in leadership and you're a follower or somebody that attends or somebody that's, and a lot of times what happens is you have people that are come and they get involved in the ministry, they're serving in areas, and then they're manipulated by these people, and they have issues in their life, and it's magnified, and the leaders, their problems don't exist.
The leaders' problems.
The leaders' problems don't exist. Yeah.
All right.
We're moving right through this list.
We may make it through it, huh?
Right.
So that was number 6. Number 7 on our list: over spiritualizing of everything.
Yeah, this is kind of a deal where, God told me. God told me to do this, or God told me you should do this, or God told me that this is what our church should be doing. Now, again, I'm always leery of that, and I think, again, it should be tested. There's people, there's not just one magical person that can hear from God. Mm-hmm. And so when you have one person that sets up themselves as the ultimate authority, and they make every decision by using the term or similar term of, well, this is what the Lord said. I sense God is saying this. I sense we need to do this. Well, I'm not totally against that, but what I'm against is using it to manipulate and make things happen, and they could be totally wrong. It could be just simply something they feel like they need to do or want to do, and you get into manipulation. Yeah. Again, these are signs of spiritual abuse. I'm not saying that every time somebody feels like God told them to do something that it's totally wrong or it's spiritual abuse. I'm not saying that. Right. But I think that there's a pattern that usually happens, and I think that if it's always this, and you're looking at some of these things, and it's like, this isn't working out.
And as we're going through this list, some of these things kind of appear in some of the known cults in the world today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of this, this abuse has taken place, and it's now could be considered a cult within the country.
And the only thing I'm saying here, Steve, is that it doesn't have to be a known cult to see some of these signs we're talking about.
True.
It can happen in denominations. It can happen in all sorts of different settings.
All right. So number 8 on our list, hovering over personal decisions in a person's life.
This kind of gets back to the shepherding movement, and I kind of mentioned this in the very last point if we get to it. There's this idea that it's basically controlling people. And I think, who you should marry, what house you should get, even what car you should get, what job you should get. And look, I'm all for getting wise counsel.
The church is weighing in on these subjects.
Yeah, heavily. And it's usually somebody in the church. It's usually a leader or leaders in the church. And so years ago, I was involved in the 1970s in a movement called the shepherding movement. I don't know if you've heard me talk about it before. And this was basically what went on. And the idea was good in the sense that, hey, you're young, you should get some good counsel when you make decisions. Nothing wrong with that, right? I had somebody when I was pastoring years ago, I had a guy come to me and said, look, and I was doing marriage counseling or premarital counseling with him and his fiancée. And, it's going well. And he came to me one time later by himself and said, so do you think I should marry this girl? And I said, well, I appreciate you asking me. I said, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I think you guys seem to be on the same page on things. Doesn't seem anything, doesn't seem like an unhealthy relationship to me. And I told him, I said, I think it's your decision, but I think things look good. I don't see anything weird about your relationship. No warning signs.
Right.
As a pastor, I didn't see anything weird. And they're still married today. They've been married probably 15 years now.
But in a spiritually abusive case, they would say, "Oh no, you need to hold out for this other woman."
Yeah, and it's the point of control. So
Right.
I made that point just to say, look, I think it's good to get counsel from people. I mean, especially if you don't really know what you're doing in something. If I'm going to buy a car and I don't know much about it or something, I'm going to get with somebody that knows about the car, so I can make an intelligent decision, right?
Right.
But I think what happens is this is a over abuse where you can't make any decision unless I approve it.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Very common when it comes to spiritual abuse, and so again, good godly counsel, nothing wrong with that. But I actually had somebody tell me that was giving my wife and I, my fiance and I, marriage counseling 24 years ago. He told me, I don't think you should marry her.
Oh.
Yeah. And he's here in town. But he did marry us, and it we're friends, and my wife just saw him the other day, and but I mean, again, it's okay to give your opinion, and I don't think he stepped across the boundary there. I think if he would have thrown us out of church or totally refused to marry us without any really good reason, and I would say, okay, that's maybe abuse, maybe, but I mean, he didn't do any of that. His opinion was, I don't think you should marry this girl, but he married us anyhow, and it worked out, at least so far.
All right.
After 24 years.
So that was hovering over personal decisions. Number 9,
Yeah.
a culture of exclusive spirituality. We have a monopoly on God.
That's a sign of spiritual abuse. So my church is the only church you should go to because we're the right church.
We're the true church.
We're the true church. Or I'm the true pastor. Or I'm the true apostle. Or I'm the true prophet. And so those guys down the street, they're missing it.
They don't have it, huh?
We've got the truth here. We've got that. When somebody gets up and says stuff like that, you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
That is a sign of spiritual abuse. And trust me, I have heard it with my own ears from other pastors or other people. So again, I'm sure may get some feedback here on some of this stuff that people may not be happy with that, but that's the whole idea that, hey, we've got the monopoly on God. That's just ridiculous. That's a sign of spiritual abuse.
All right. Number 10.
Usually, and number 10 is heavy financial manipulation. So normally this is always a sign of some type of spiritual abuse. And again, this is very common even in some churches that aren't considered cults or anything. But the idea here is that, hey, you guys need to be giving every single thing you've got. And the church is important. And actually, I've heard it from some well-respected people that, well, I don't know how far I want to get with this, but the idea is, you put God first and everybody else comes second. Okay, well, I would agree with that, but there are areas where you need to really carefully look at that because, if my family needs to be fed, and I need to feed my family, and you want me to give my last dollar to your church, in my opinion, that's wrong. I'm going to feed my family first, and then I'll give to the church.
And that's biblical, too, to take care of your family first. Right?
I think it is, but there are people that would say differently, and this is one area that people might get on our case about or me on about. But I think when people are manipulating you, when leaders are trying to manipulate you, and they're certainly doing it with finances, saying that, hey, if you don't give, you're going to be in poverty, or, you're going to get God's curse because you didn't give. That's manipulation.
All right.
There's a term for that I can't use on this podcast. It's a Greek word for that.
All right.
It's called baloney.
Oh, okay.
That's my version.
Your Greek word baloney, huh? So 11. Now, tell us about this. What is this one about?
So 11 is creating an internal bubble that isolates people from their families and other ministries. So, and I don't know why I've been exposed to all these people, but I certainly have been exposed to people who have done this. So if you're going to be a part of my ministry, you need to really serve the church, serve me. And you know what? If your family disagrees, well, cut them off. Your family are heathens. Because Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead. And those people, if they don't agree with me, they're dead to me. So cut those people off. You get what I'm saying here?
Right. So
you're isolating people from their family, from other organizations, other ministries, because we're the true church. I'm the true leader. And how dare you talk to somebody that doesn't agree with me?
Right.
Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
So you're alienating the rest of that family by
and this can even involve not just your parents or brothers or sisters. This can also jump into your marriage relationship and your kids. That's how far it can go. Where your wife doesn't agree with our church or agree with me as the leader. Well, too bad. She's
got to go. Huh?
She's going the wrong direction.
Yeah. You need to leave that woman behind. Huh?
Exactly. And again, this is that bubble that people try to create. That again, this is a sign of spiritual abuse. Now, well, look, I'm not saying that there may be people in your life that are toxic people, and you might get some counsel saying, you know what, your brother is just toxic, and you really should put boundaries up in that relationship because that's not a healthy relationship. I could see counsel like that, but we're talking extreme stuff here.
Yeah, the key distinction is that in the first case where you're trying to just create this allegiance to you have your own church body in mind, your church leadership in mind as the final motivation, whereas the latter is you're looking out for the best interest of that individual.
Yeah. All right. So we're out of time here. Let's jump real quick to just a couple real fast here.
Okay.
So number 12, unwillingness to act with compassion towards those who leave. So again, I've seen this all the time. We talked about all this signs of spiritual abuse. There's people that go you know what, this is not for me. I'm out of this church. And guess what? Those people are labeled as traitors, as demonic
heathens.
People.
Right.
They're terrible people because they left our ministry, and therefore you should not talk to them, which is kind of gets into what we were talking about earlier, isolating people because they're wrong and we're right. See what I'm saying?
Right.
And then the other one I probably ought to bring up before we go here is isolated accountability structure. So again, you've got people in leadership, but there's no accountability. So they're just doing what they want to do. They might have 2 or 3 people, or maybe even a board that's all with them, but they're all practicing spiritual abuse, and so there's no accountability, and you have unhealthy stuff going on, and there's no room for healthy debate or healthy discussion over issues because again, they've got the truth, you don't, and there's no accountability. So, all right, we're out of time, but these are signs of spiritual abuse. I'm not saying it because it pops up once in a while that, they're all wrong and they're all spiritual abusing you. That may not be the case. But if you see this stuff happening, it's not a healthy thing, and it needs to be dealt with. And we're talking affecting not only hundreds of lives, but possibly thousands of lives.
Right.
It can move that direction.
So I guess we talked about earlier, I would assume you would approach your elders and this could be really challenging, though, if there's people within the church that if everyone's practicing spiritual abuse, then your best bet is to leave.
Your best bet is to leave.
Right.
But if you've got, again, my friend up in Washington State, she was a big part of blowing the roof off that crazy deal up there. And if people want to know what that's all about, you can email us. We're out of time. I'll talk to you. I'll tell you who it is. But anyhow.
All right. Okay.
So this wasn't as bad as you thought it was going to be, right, Steve?
No, it's more enlightening than
there you go.
Than our notes had pointed me towards.
Yeah.
So
all right. So if you do want to give us some feedback, we'd love to hear from you. We really would. Support at streamingchurch.tv. I have a guy who's been involved in ministry now for over 40 years. So I'm telling you, I've seen these things up personal, real life, and it does happen. Hopefully it's not happening to you. So support at streamingchurch.tv. So we're out of time. We need to get out of here.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. He's Steve Lacy. I'm Phil Thompson. Thanks for listening. We'll get back on some tech-related things probably here in the next couple weeks or so. So stick with us. Thanks for being with us today on the Church Solutions Podcast. Have yourself a great day.